Alessandro, thank you very much for this different thought on generative AI. It's, of course, as I said, different compared to what we're looking at these days at all the GPT models, the Llama, the Bird, and so on. But we're here together with all the other people who already had a session, but also with Alona. Hi, Alona. Could you please introduce yourself for the people who are watching?
Yeah, hey, welcome everyone. I'm Alona Gareva, Microsoft AI MVP, running PyRadius Amsterdam and working for Saltworks as a principal machine learning engineer.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've prepared a couple of questions that we can discuss just now. And the first one is we've heard a lot about copilots building chatbots with the GPT models. What other kinds of use cases have you been working on? Maybe I'll start with Alona.
Oh, that's actually a lot. We're not allowed to say a lot about that, but at least from what we're experimenting with, there are a lot of promising stuff, but also there are a lot of let's say guidelines which you need to implement, because otherwise it's a little bit, I would say, oversold and overhyped. Like, oh, this is beautiful box, you just input text or whatever you want, any information that you have, and just output a perfectly structured information from you. It is, but it is not to a specific extent. So I would say now the majority of the use cases that we are working with is just experimenting, try out small things, running small use cases, especially for the highly regulated industries, which is pretty dangerous to release it as it is. So we need to pass a lot of compliance meetings and everything. And for them, for this kind of folks, it's completely something new and they don't understand how it works. And also it's accepting that it's not 100% true output that you can easily test. So it's not something that, could be easily testable. And sometimes it could generate really strange ideas, so really strange things. So you need to be prepared for literally mitigating it.
Thank you. And for you, any specific use cases in mind?
A very practical use cases we were considering is, for example, to use large language model capabilities to perform more efficiently some data processing tasks. So especially, say, when you work, and this happens quite frequently with unstructured data. So it is very useful if you can summarize the content and gave it a specific format and, for example, output it in a JSON. That could save a lot of time and increase the quality of the data that you can use to feed whatever model later on.
You, Willem? Anything
Yeah,
you've been working on lately you can share?
Yeah, as with the others, not a lot of concrete cases. There's one interesting use case that we are working on is actually using the embeddings generated for OpenAI. And we use that to collect clusterings of people that are answering questions in questionnaires. So we have a million people filling out questionnaires the whole day. And we generate embeddings from the answers, and then we cluster those together to generate a persona. So we're not interested in the real person, we're interested in what sort of person is represented. And that's where the embedding part of the model is more interesting than the model itself, actually. So that's quite fun. And the other thing is, for us internally, we write a lot of project proposals. We're trying to automate part of it using a large language model. But it's mostly trying at the moment, so it might not work in the end. Yeah, lots of fun stuff happening.
It's all quite new, so it's still up to developers to figure out what can we build, of course.
Yeah.
But now all these use cases are mostly concerning text generation. We also have many different kinds of other models that generate actually pictures or photo, even really photorealistic things. For example, DALI. Have you been working with this already at customer sites, or do you see specific use cases that are very handy?
We haven't actually used DALI yet. We had a use case at the beginning of this year where we were classifying container codes, shipping container codes. We didn't have a lot of training data to work with. So what we did is we actually generated more images to train the model on. So we started with a sample of 2,500 images, and we ended up with 5.3 million after the computer was done. Is it perfect? No, by no means perfect, but at least it alleviates the pressure on people gathering data. We didn't have a lot of people running around the world taking pictures of shipping containers for some reason, and this was a perfect substitute and a lot cheaper to do.
Quite and a very interesting use case. Never thought about the usage of image generation that way.
Yeah.
Nice. Yolona?
I was just listening. It's like how we were working on the same project. Because in my case, then it was further distilled to the moment when you need to literally perform OKR on top of to recognize the number of the container the number of the container, which comes with a lot of other challenges because you have the number of containers that's written horizontal way, but you also have the numbers that's written in vertical way, while text is preserved not in vertical way, it's not rotated, it's preserved in this way. And there are a really limited amount of text models before that were capable of doing this. It was mostly designed for Japanese and Chinese language, as you can imagine, and Korean language. And it was pretty bad in comparison with normal, let's say horizontal text. But getting back to pictures, a lot of, so using a couple of projects using Stable Diffusion at the core. And what we're doing, it's literally a treasure trove for textile companies that producing literally visuals for their websites, for example, for their product lines. Also to reduce the waste, so you don't need to produce a lot of samples of, for example, clothes pieces. You can just literally generate them and then leverage it and give it to designers to play around with 3D and everything, how it looks like, what the structure of this, let's say, cloth, whatever. In addition to that is, again, reducing the amount of money that has to be spent on different photo sessions, because as you know, we're all talking about personalization for the consumers. And for a lot of consumers, it's not enough just to have one picture of the person just standing like this. You want to see the person in action, the person which wearing this clothes or shoes, performing some specific like jumps or whatever. It's also helped a lot. We were generating synthetic data, but also generating literally pictures for the website. That's basically what it was. And it's also helped us to enhance the visual search capabilities we were building, because for creation of visual search is pretty like complex task as well. Again, that requires a lot of synthetic data, and sometimes this data is really hard to get. So by generating the data and then training another model on top of this data, we were managed to achieve, let's say, the level of productivity that you could never imagine about. And I think the third case is for game industry, because when you develop a game, I'm talking about like games like PC4, you know, they're like, or sorry, PC5 now, or like Xbox, whatever. So a lot of time and money should be spent on creation on NPC, recording voice, recording, let's say, creating the way how this person gonna look like. And with this fantastic capabilities, now it's again speed ups the cycle of development, and it's reduce as well as carbon footprint, because you don't burn so much compute as you have to burn before. You burn it still, but in a limited amount of time, I would say, in a specific sequence. So yeah, and I think there are much more to that, but these three use cases were the most powerful.
Yeah. For you, Alessandra?
I'm a bit biased here because I don't work with images at work, but a lot of the people that I know outside work are either front-end developer or designers or architects. So when I hear about the capabilities provided by generative AI in terms of images, I think straight away to a possibility for these categories of people to experiment quicker and have a great source of inspiration for new front-end layout or website designs or rendering of building. So this type of applications.
Yeah, but I think if you link it back to the text, there's more use cases at the moment going on with text than with the image, right?
Yeah, I think that's due to ChatGPT being released, and people all of a sudden became awake and say, "Oh, this is interesting. I can talk to my computer and it talks back, and it seems intelligent."
It seems.
Also, that's yeah. It's mostly there's a lot of hype. I'm going to be honest and say, well, I hope that dies down a little bit, get to a normal proportion, and people start to learn more use cases beyond the text use case. But I think that will happen.
Yeah, the funny thing is, DALI was released before ChatGPT even. So I think it was 2020 already when the first
Yeah,
DALI
the
models
first-
Yeah,
were
the
yeah,
released.
first
yeah, yeah,
version. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think if we also look at how Photoshop is integrating these kinds of models to help editors to be able to edit pictures or extend the background or remove people from pictures, it's quite
It's
magnificent, right?
insane. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane what you can do now. And I don't think Photoshop would have received as much attention when ChatGPT didn't happen.
That's true, because at the end it's still a combination also of natural language combined with picture or video editing.
Yeah, we shouldn't forget that there's a lot of pre-processing and post-processing happening around those models. So the fact that Photoshop was able to build content-aware fill and neural filters, that happens because they have a long history of knowledge about manipulating pixels on screen. And now they start adding AI and it gets even better. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, if you go back to text, Willem, your session about semantic kernel, we also have LangChain. Could you give us maybe a comparison? What?
Yeah. Is there a comparison? So the thing is, since it's so super popular, people have started building frameworks like crazy. So LangChain and semantic kernel are both well known at the moment, but that might change. And there's not a lot of difference between the frameworks actually. You can build the same applications with both LangChain and semantic kernel. The big difference, I think, for .NET developers and Microsoft-minded people is that you can use semantic kernel from C#. And you can't do that in LangChain. And but as time progresses, I think Java will join in on the fray as well, and we will have a replacement for LangChain in semantic kernel. I'm pretty sure. There's also an effort, people building graphical tools to build prompt chains. Building a single prompt is hard still, but it looks easy. But as soon as you enter the space where you have to build chains, then it becomes very complicated. And I think it's nice to see that there are better tools being built at the moment.
Why would someone make use of one of these frameworks instead of just consuming the OpenAI libraries by itself?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so if you go up to chat.openai.com, you basically enter a chat application. It's already made. And if you start entering prompts that are not chat related, it might not respond in the correct way because behind the scenes, it received an initial prompt. It received some instructions from OpenAI. Hey, you're a friendly chatbot. You're going to answer questions. Oh, please don't talk about these topics and don't reveal that you have a couple of secrets that we put into your model. That might, I mean, if you're chatting, that doesn't interfere. But if you're building another application that has to do another task, then that will probably interfere, but we don't know how much. So if you want to start with a clean slate, I highly suggest building an application from scratch almost, but based on the model itself, rather than using something like chat.openai.com.
Anyone thoughts on this?
We
Please.
have done some internal project using LangChain, where, as we said before, it's important. It's an important time this to experimenting and testing the limits. So we have used. We wanted to build a document-based question and answer chatbot using ChatGPT and building some semantic layer. And for this, we used LangChain to feed the data extracted from internal non-sensitive documents and store it in a vector database and use it in combination with OpenAI to build this chatbot. So it was a rather quick experiment to run. So we were surprised by how easy it is to be able to get something up and running.
Okay, thank you. Well, if we go back to some discussions that were done in the keynote, one was about copywriting and regulation. And if if we think back a couple of months, or is it 2 months or 1 month, I don't exactly remember again, there was some group of people who wanted to pause all AI development for 6 months.
Research. Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Research, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. More correct. How do you personally feel about that, Alona?
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that. So first, let's focus on the second part. So to stop AI research, I think it doesn't make any sense to stop AI research because it's not the AI research that do something wrong with the world. It's just how we as people use it. It's just a tool, and the way how we use it. First part, especially working a lot with images, it's really, really, I would say, unclear ground because by default you're not allowed to scrape stuff from the internet. It's by default, but you know how it works. So the majority of images were of course scrapped, and you can see it back when you recreate the training samples. You can see the blurred, let's say misformed, for example, logo of Getty Images and all of that. So that's hard part of the story. So what I do hope there are more attention will be put in this field. So what is let's say, allowed to be scrapped, what is not. Then also, like to answer the questions, if I generated something based on the work of two big artists, could I put my name on it, or should I pay royalties to someone for using that? There are a lot of, let's say, ethical questions that could be sorted out. But I think we right now in the right direction because the more and more voices popping up and the more and more things we start discussing, but although it's a very tricky ground because you don't know to whom to attribute let's say, the creation point. That's, I would say, the hardest one. And another thing, imagine, for example, getting back to the story of e-commerce platform and images. You want to generate clothes, you want to change the clothes, how it looks like, but you do not prefer that it's gonna grab the brand's logos of other producers and place it on top of your clothes. That's something that you want to prevent of happening. So that's why there are a lot of things, there are a lot of moving pieces, I would say. But to cut the long story short, there a lot of work that has to be done about how we scrape. Do we give permission to use this data? Do we give permission to use our photos from social media? Do we give permission to use our videos on YouTube to use as a training data as an input? That's the big question, I would say.
In my opinion, it's very a bit utopic to say that you can stop or not, because it's not you press a button and it stops. So research and advances are done by different organization entities. There are the big companies, there are open source community, there are individual researchers, there are universities, and it's difficult to stop this flow. I think it's a more a responsible and pragmatic way to deal with all the side effects is to experiment and acknowledge and be mindful, making sure there are all the safety nets or discussions. So I think it's better to have a sense of awareness and create communities and talk about so that everybody can be more aware, because it's inevitable that this is a so disruptive technology. I cannot remember any other product that became so popular and generated so much adoption and discussion.
Yeah, totally agree with you. It's so changing the world but I think therefore it might be important, instead of saying 6 months pause, let us say, okay, let's do 6 months focusing on how to use it in a responsible way.
Yeah.
And if you focus on that, well, then more things will follow out, and because of people being able to start making use of it more, they will also figure out what's going wrong. Based on that, indeed, enhance the product. Right? Okay. I think linked to that also, I think the big problem also is that people do not always understand what those models do. Do you think, how can we help people educating on this?
Yeah, we're already spending a lot of time educating people, of course. Global AI community is doing this for a large part. Local communities are also very important, I think. For example, I spent a couple of days a few weeks ago at local universities, but also lower education. People who are working with their hands, building stuff, commercial services, people behind the desk, the help desk, for example, explaining each on their own level what AI means to them. And sometimes you have to explain the mathematics behind it. If I'm at a local university, that's the level. But sometimes it's just, how can you use this in a positive way? And that really helps, I think. I got a lot of positive feedback on the fact that we focused on the positive things. For example, translating a very complicated letter from the local municipality explaining to you that you shouldn't put trash next to the trash can outside, which was a page-long letter explaining that it was wrong according to some laws and subsections, etc. And I showed to them, this is what you can do with ChatGPT. You can ask it to explain it to a 5-year-old. Of course, you're not 5 years old, but yeah, it's still useful. I think that sort of education is very important. And check, double check. That's always what we teach to everyone. I think that's beyond AI, critical thinking is the best skill to have right now, I think.
Any thoughts, Alona, on this?
Yeah, I just want to add. So usually during, let's say, my everyday, let's say, agenda, I need to explain AI to different levels of people, the different responsibilities pools as well. And the thing which is pretty hard to do is to explain to the people who are already oversold with these capabilities and possibilities, to explain it's not a search engine. So sorry to say that, but if you guess that you never pay any attention to how the data were stored, how the data were transformed as your company, how data were used at your company, let's say what the sensitivity levels of this data. And if you just throw it, you know, to the ChatGPT and then it's gonna figure out on your own, then will be capable of finding everything. Unfortunately, it doesn't work this way. You can use it at the layer on top to enhance this capability, but it's not replace the solid search work that was done before, let's say, for many, many years. And I think sometimes also showing by doing. So for example, that's you mentioned with local communities, and also doing the same, and just explaining the limitations and showing, for example, like good example, if we're talking about context again, getting back to ChatGPT, hallucinations, that's exactly, if you make people aware of it, it's not a search engine, it's not a knowledge graph, it's just this interface that try to predict the closest possible answer, taking this word context. That's what it's capable of, although it can produce stuff that looks really appealing, it looks really, let's say, like future-proof. Unfortunately, it's not. And by just step by step, indeed, educating, giving this session and showing, look, these are possibilities, that's fantastic, but look at that part, that's also like limitations of it. So I think that's the making point.
Well, I think it's not a problem, but it creates a problem, is that implementing these models are quite easy to do. So you don't need to have advanced master skills to build a small chatbot already. And if you don't know how to fine tune these models, then you create problems, of course.
Yeah, it's deceptively easy because the first step is really simple. You enter text and you get a reply that looks reasonable, but then somebody else changes one word in the input, and then it breaks all of a sudden. And then the question is why? Why did that happen? And we don't know, not yet at least. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have. So we need a mix of people who are writing prompts using the model from a very basic perspective, trying things out. Oh, it might be useful to use it for this, and then have proper support from data scientists, people with more knowledge about the internals, to support them in their journey and make it better.
All right. One more last question. Well, just the last question, not one more last. And it's a question we almost ask everyone. What's next? Sandro, what do you think?
I was watching a video from Jan LeCun about transition from machine learning to systems that have more cognitive capacities. So I think there is a lot of effort being done in this sense by all the community interested, for example, in the causality aspect of statistical learning systems. And also, I think a lot of development for all what concerns the MLOps part of this large language model, because now we are in the stage where we are experimenting, but at some point it will be the case to more and more frequently deployment. So you need to take care of monitoring, of reproducibility, of compliance, and so this is also something that deserves a special attention.
Yeah. So a very interesting one, the version control of, for example, the prompts. Alona?
Yeah, I think two things for me. One is to making it accessible for the more and more diverse and inclusive society. So to make sure that it's not only like the typical developer do these things and that's limited by power of imagination of this person, but also other folks who can challenge it and see it from different perspective and what kind of things we can do with it, how we could enhance the life of people with specific disabilities, for example, what we can do about that. And second is never underestimate the power of open source communities. So we're really happy to see as soon as, let's say, this proprietary closed models were released and get popularity, then immediately like it started popping up like Llama, then Falcon. And I think it's more things to come. And even, let's say, again, inviting more folks into joining this open source community and make it challenge and make it open for discussions for everyone. That's probably what's going to lead us to more, I would say, better and safer future, from my
I
perspective.
think it was someone at Google who said we don't need to be scared of the big cloud vendors, but most scared of the open source world that would probably create better large language models than all the rest.
And it's already happening. And they get smaller. So I think that that's another one that people should look out for. So climate change is real, and we're noticing it more and more. And in the meantime, we're building these models that are so large that you need a full data center to run it. That's sort of going in a weird direction. I wouldn't say necessarily wrong in the sense that, yes, of course, that will change. But the focus of open source on building smaller models that are more powerful, I think is a great step to see here. And we should definitely focus on trying to build models that are CO2 efficient. If we have to spend the CO2, let's make good use of it instead of blowing it all on a bad model in that sense. Yeah.
Okay. Any last thoughts about generative AI?
Well, I'm so looking forward to the next weeks.
I think was during one of the build sessions, they said, of course, we're not in an AI winter anymore, but in a serious spring break festival with everything that is coming out. All right.
Indeed.
Thank you all for joining us today here at the Global AI Studios. We're grateful for having you and share your thoughts about generative AI. And with that, I thank you all for watching this online, live, or on demand later on YouTube. Bye-bye.